rivalrous conflict, right, which lies at the core structure, right, of, right, all of the destabilizing forces that now with exponential, right, weaponry can actually take down the planet. So what we pointed out there was, and it's really important, that in that structure, right, you needed to be involved, right, to have a sense of duty and honor. You were involved in the rivalrous conflict. You were a soldier. You were defending the in-group against the out-group, right? And so therefore, duty and honor came from, right, that role you had in defending the in-group. The whole point of the unique self, and this is the place where we're joining genius, Barbara's beautiful phrase, right, which creates a new social synergy, right, Barbara's phrase, right? What actually happens is when you actually realize, oh, I actually can have duty and honor based on my unique self. That's shocking. That's a shocking realization. I can actually fulfill my duty and honor. But for that to be true, unique self can't just be an option. It has to be the calling, right? The vocation of destiny, right? The demand of reality. Reality actually needs me and demands my presence, yearns for me, and can't do it without me. That creates duty and honor, right? Without, right, what Warren calls male disposability. And that's a shocking, momentous leap. So let's hold here and let's breathe for a second. Breathe for a second.
Charter schools, as you know, are technically public schools, but unlike public schools, as a rule, so in public schools, when a boy takes a reading test, if the teacher knows it is a boy, he scores 30% lower on a reading test than if the teacher does not know he is a boy. So it gives you a sense of, that's just one little tidbit of the feminization of the school system, but much more important than that is the fact that 70% in African American communities in inner city, 70% of the children do not grow up with a dad. And then they move from an all-female, female-dominated family into a school system which is dominated by females also. And then we wonder why their first response to a gang leader is positive, because that's the first male that says, I can respect you. Here's the way to get respect. Here's the way to define you. So charter schools, as a rule, have a great so public schools tend to have less diversity in the amount of openness to the male style of learning. So males, for example, are far more likely to learn with a significant amount of recess. Recess has increasingly been, in public schools, recess has increasingly been diminished because of the fear of litigation as a result of boys hitting girls, girls hitting boys, and mostly boys hitting boys. But the data on recess shows that the recess increases the brain's capacity, increases intelligence more quickly than studying does. And recess develops social skills much more so. Public schools have also been terrible about vocational education, which some charter schools have done a much better job with. So with public schools, for example, boys in the old days, when your father or grandfather, if he wasn't academically inclined, he could then take a job with using his hands, being physical, using his muscle. Today, though, we've morphed from muscle to mental, or from muscle to microchip. And so so boys don't have the opportunity to go into using their mind as much. If they don't use their mind, they're often left out of any high-paying jobs. But in Japan, where they've also noticed this, that 25% of their students train in vocational schools, and and of those 25% that do, 99.6% get jobs after graduation. So charter schools, as a rule, tend to have a much greater openness to diversity. So I think that they are a gift to the culture when combined with public schools. Both have advantages, but in terms of boys, the boy crisis is oftentimes a little bit less magnified in schools, some charter schools that incorporate more boy involvement. The best in the country is Urban Dove, that in Bedford-Stuy, which the first 2 hours of every day, the male and female teachers play with the kids, have games, have competitions, and so on. And then mind you, the male and female teachers, showing that this type of sports can be done and boundary enforcement and those types of things in team play can also be taught by females as well as males. These are uniquely male characteristics. But then the crucial thing, remember before I was saying that roughhousing gets used by leverage, the leverage that from the bonding that roughhousing creates then gets used later in the day. Well, in Urban Dove, the Bedford-Stuy school, the teachers who do the coaching in the first 2 hours of the day in physical activity then are available throughout the day to coach the kids to overcome their adversary, the algebra, the reading, the writing, whatever their other adversaries are. So the bonding of my coach is my ally, he who can overcome the opponent, then gets translated into my coach is the ally who can overcome my barriers in school of not paying attention and things like that. That's the type of gift that some charter schools at their best can contribute, that then allow us to have models that we can see whether they work or not, don't work 20, 30 years later. You're very welcome.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
What happens when I talk to her about her son is her protector instinct is triggered, her protector instinct toward her son is triggered. When I talk to her about an adult male, her desire to be protected is triggered, and the males in much of her life that she's remembering are ones around sexuality that did not protect her, even though she may have had many protectors. So huge difference between receptivity to male issues when talking about adult men versus sons. Does that make sense? Yes, the answer is YES. Yes, they're almost all white, and African American kids, Hispanic kids, and white Caucasian kids kill each other differently, so and kill differently, and express depression differently. So remember that every school shooting is not just a homicide; it's also a suicide. Either it's a suicide directly, or for all practical purposes, that kid ends his life, his viable life. So, and white males commit suicide much more frequently than African American males. African American males kill each other. Hispanic males, and so they kill each other at forgetting the exact figure now, but it's about 8-1 over non-African American males. The Hispanic males are more likely to kill each other as well, and only Native American males kill via suicide to a greater degree, but they don't do the killing in modalities like school shooting. So the brief issue there is that with different racial and familial backgrounds, kids express their depression differently. But males express their depression, white males express their depression much more through suicide. So at the age of 9, before testosterone sets in, boys and girls commit suicide at exactly the same amount and very minimally. Between 10 and 14, boys commit suicide twice as often as girls. between 15 and 19, 4 times as often as girls, and between 20 and 25, 5.6 times as often as girls. So the male, and one of the reasons is because a girl, let's say in college or high school, she's feeling depressed and down. Her parents notice it. She is twice as likely to go to a counselor. The boys are only half as likely to go to a counselor, and twice as likely to commit suicide early in that 10 to 14-year-old age period, and then that difference between go to counselors. So we have girls reporting themselves depressed to counselors, so therefore we calculate statistically that girls and women are more likely to be depressed. But who's committing suicide? The boys who don't go to counselors, and because the girls reporting their depression to counselors is part of the solution, and boys are reinforcing the problem. And so that old heroic intelligence of, when the going gets tough, the tough get going, works to end boys' lives in ways that we cannot detect. And that's why I had to go through and totally revamp our identification of depression and the red flags of that before I was satisfied that I'd been able to pinpoint what's going on. It's a really important question.
In Hebrew mysticism, tshukah, which literally means desire, right, is the ontology of reality. Reality is desire. One of the things we talk about in evolutionary church a lot, right, is we talk about, right, if you have this desire arising in you, and you understand that desire is the desire of reality moving in you, right, then something shifts, right? And what that does, it gives dignity. And once there's dignity to desire, then we can own desire. And let's just go for one last second. And I think there was a distinction, who made it? Zach, earlier today, right, between the human being, when the human being regresses, they become a demon, I think you said, Zach, and not an animal, right? Something like that. That's really important because actually, animality, what's animality? Animality means there's an instinct in me that drives me that's unconscious. Okay, and that instinct drives me to mate. Now, animal sexuality is about 5 seconds. That's how it works, very fast. The human being, instinct awakens as allurement, right? I actually have a conscious experience of allurement, hopefully for a little bit more than 5 seconds. That would be helpful.
You mean
okay?
Sex lasts longer than 5 seconds?
Brahmacharya in the Hindu tradition, right? There we have it, okay? All right. Right, so it's a fascinating thing, right? So actually, right, when I actually realize that this force of allurement in me is dignified, and that allurement is not anti-rational, it's supra-rational. Allurement is actually one of the essential guides of my life. So I've got to do what's called in the sacred traditions, right? In the 16th century, for example, if y'all are hanging around in those texts, they called it berur tshukah, which means the clarification of desire. I've got to clarify my allurement, got to clarify my desire, and then own its full power and its full dignity. And the demonization of desire, right, causes unbearable suffering, and in the end, unbearable violence, right, unbearable oppression, right, on every level. So it's a beautiful place to end.